Okay, so then lesson 1.3, the part 1 curriculum analysis, I watched, or I just went over a 3rd through 5th grade lesson plan about multiplying by 10. The content was chunked by having students first completing the handout. So it had a T-chart, and it was like, so-and-so needs to have 10 times the ingredients for a baking sale. So it would start off with what she originally had, and then multiplying that by 10, what would that look like on the other side of the T-chart? And then the teacher would have them watch a video that kind of help explains the handout they completed. And in the video, the Bianca would make a mistake, and the video would get paused and like kind of allow the students to discuss what the mistake was, why she made that mistake, with one another in their little small groups. And then after they discussed it with one another and kind of made sure that everyone was on the right track and understanding it completely, they would take an assessment on it. And I just wrote, metacognition was built into this lesson by having students use their knowledge of what they know by multiplying by 10, and encourage the students to complete the assignment on their own before comparing their answers to the video. They needed to know and then explain what mistake she made and the correct way to solve it would be. And then the productive struggle would be the students. The very last one was she only needed half of an ingredient. So instead of a whole number, they were working with half. So I wrote that the productive struggle would be the students knowing how to multiply half by 10. And so this would require students to use their knowledge for division instead of multiplication. So instead of asking themselves, what is 10 times 1/2, they'd ask themselves, what would half of 10 be? Or what is 10 divided by 2? And then the questions that were listed in the lesson plan were to fill in the columns, like I said, for the ingredients and show all the calculations, compare the values on the left and right. How are they different? How are they similar? And explain how you could solve the problem of putting 10 times as much butter as called for the recipe, which is what the half was. So the order and progression of these questions supported student learning by having them work their problems with a visual aid. So that was the chart that they filled out. By starting with the chart, the visual aids helped them explain themselves for questions 2 and 3. So how were those numbers similar and different? They were able to use their knowledge learned to explain themselves the process of solving the problem. And then last part of part 1 was explain how this lesson might motivate students. So I just said it would motivate students by encouraging them to go back and rely on knowledge that they possibly already know. And then by comparing their answers in the video and seeing Bianca make make a mistake for the problem, if they got it correct or were able to understand the mistake, it would encourage them like, okay, like I do know this, I can continue to do the rest of the problems and can confidently go into the assessment afterwards. And then when they share their answers on how they solve the problems, some students may be motivated to try again and solve similar assignment after understanding how to complete the question. So even if they did make the mistake, like Bianca did, or something different, once they discussed it with their peers, then it would help them understand their mistake and learn from it instead of just kind of shying away. Because I know, like, sometimes in school, if I made a mistake, I wouldn't really say anything. I would just kind of like hide my paper and not show anyone.
That's me. I was the same way.
So having them be encouraged to learn from their mistake instead of kind of like us just hiding it and not wanting to build on our knowledge. And so part 2, the planning for critical thinking and problem solving, she had each student, they were creating a tiny home. And so she had actual clients for the students to work with. And so by the end of their project, they had to present what they did and put into their tiny home and everything to kind of persuade the client to buy theirs.
Oh, that's cute.
I know, it just looks so fun. I want to do it sometime. But she had them engage in various activities and lessons in order to complete the project. She also broke it down into chunks. So one day they would go from doing math and kind of doing like the calculations for it. Well, okay, if we're building a tiny home, we only have, this many square feet. So how many square feet are going to be the living room and the bedroom and the kitchen and stuff like that? Do you want it to be 1 story or 2 stories? And then the other days they would be doing they would also be doing language arts, so kind of explaining themselves on how they were able to calculate it, and that way at the end they were able to better present their tiny home and use that persuasive language to have the client buy their house. And then after they did the math and language arts portion and started figuring out what all they were going to put in their tiny home, she made them make a 3D model of what the home would look like. And so then that tiny home model, along with their poster, would be what they presented to their client. And I just had one standard that aligned with the problem solving would be the use of active critical thinking. They had to work backwards and break down, because she's like, all right, so we're building a tiny home. What do we need to do? Instead of having each step going forward be like, all right, we're going to do some math today and then we're going to do some language arts. She would make them work backwards, like, okay, well, we only have this many square feet. How are we going to break this down? How are you going to be able to persuade your client to buy your house and not the other kids? And then she also broke it down, like I said, to math and ELA curriculum to keep them engaged with the project. And then I think there was maybe 3 or 4 students in the group, and that way they were able to work together on it. And, some kids might be stronger in math and some kids might be stronger in ELA. And so having them work together just to encourage each other and motivate each other. Because, like, for me, math is not my strong suit. And so if someone was like, here's this project, how many square feet are going to be in this and this? I'd be like, I don't even know how to calculate that. I don't even know where to begin. And so then having a partner that would better understand that could kind of break it down in their terms and help me get a better understanding of, like, okay, well, we could put this here, and that's starting to make a lot more sense.
Right.
And then, so I consider an upcoming standard you will teach. And so I just did math grade 1, because I do first grade math intervention with a student. And so how could I incorporate problem solving into your lesson? And so I said a lesson I can plan that incorporates problem solving would be my students solve multiple addition equations using a tens frame. I will give 10 addition equations to each student, and we have these little like wooden 10 frames that they put stars in. And that way they're able to help visualize, like, okay, how many more do I need? How many do I already have? And see if they can complete the problems individually, and then they should be able to write the answer to the given equation.
Yeah.
And then how would I incorporate critical thinking into the problems? I would incorporate that by having each student find the missing add-in to the equation. So I would have each student start with one number, so example 7, and ask how many do I need to fill in the 10 frame, or how many more do I need. I would also, we have like a bunch of different colors, so I would have them use a different color than what they already have to help better visualize what the missing add-in is. And then after finding the missing add-in, they will rewrite the equation themselves. So 7 plus 3 equals 10. But yeah, so how do you usually, like, if you are having to do a lesson plan, how would you recommend like content chunking into what your lesson's going to be? Because I know some teachers like always do it differently. So what do you think that you do or that you've observed teachers doing that seems to be more, quote, effective and engaging for the students to learn?
So there's several ways to look at it. So let me back up a step. So with what you're pursuing is special education, correct? Okay, so that's what I thought. So there's several ways to look at it because mostly, and at least with Loudoun County, our model is either A, you'll be co-teaching, or you'll be running intervention groups. And so the chunking for, let's say, an intervention group with students with just like, more of the mild disabilities, reading disabilities, math disabilities, or whatever, you're only going to have them for a set amount of time, like with what Maria has, right now for 45 minutes. In an ideal setting, and this may not even answer your question, so I do apologize, but in an ideal setting, the purpose of special education is to have smaller groups to provide those direct interventions. However, that doesn't happen. So we have some intervention groups that have a lot of students on a lot of different levels. So it's basically about grouping those students based on where they're at and doing things because you're just one person. And so you might have to have stations. You might have to have, rotations for your kids to go through. And that's one of the things that me and my colleague try to implement when we see, intervention groups with a large number of kids. So what are some things that, you might have, kids that are lower, so they need to see you 2 to 3 times a week, right? Whereas you might have some kids that are close to being grade level, they can, do things on their own, and they may only need to meet with you 1 to 2 times a week. So
Right.
thinking about that is like, okay, what can I introduce to my kids with that, let's say, have the highest needs on Monday? And then so they have your attention on Monday, but on Tuesday, something that they can do by themselves independently, right? And then on Wednesday, they're checking back in with you. Whether that's paper-based, technology-based, or whatever. In a CDC setting, more self-contained setting, the best way to chunk things is by doing true centers and stations, just because you've got so many skills that you have to meet. You have to teach grade level standards. You have to teach, you have to expose them to grade level standards. Plus you have to meet IEP goals. And really, truly, the only way to do that is by stations and by allowing them to rotate and plan activities that are based off that topic. And so one of the things that we try to do, and I encourage self-contained teachers, is when they're with you, you might be exposing them to those grade level standards, whatever that looks like. Then when they're with a parapro, it might be an IEP goal work where they can track that data to collect on their IEP. I always like to, no matter which setting you're in, to give kids independent work because that tracks social emotional, that tracks adaptive, that tracks pre-vocational skills. It gives those kids the ability to struggle a little bit and realize, hey, I might not know the answer and struggling is okay. How do I persevere? How do I find the help? Is there, like all of those moments. So, I don't know if that really truly answers your question. But that's just how I see chunking up and breaking up task and the pacing of it, if that makes any sense. Sorry.
No. I guess my other question would be, so like for me personally, I do fourth grade math intervention and then first grade math intervention. So with fourth grade, I only have 2 kids in there, and then for first grade math intervention, I have 1.
And Stinky's a little bit different, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when I am like one-on-one, because like you said, we only have a certain amount of time to get, our service time in. So what would be the best way for me to, I guess, like include, like break down the content, but also make it engaging for that one student, because she's so sweet and I love her so much, but she does get distracted easily, and if it's not like constantly engaging or like game work, she doesn't want to do it. And like there are some times, like if she's taking a test, we'll go down and I'll make her own separate test more on like her grade, quote, grade level where she's at. So would you recommend like maybe starting out with a game and then doing our work, or maybe like doing our work first and then the game?
So you could do different things. You could do breaks, work for 5 minutes, then you get a brain break, work for 5, things like that. You could, I always say too, like I used to always cut my test up and that way it wasn't so overwhelming for the kids to see, so, and like literally it would be cut in like chunks, and I'd turn it in, especially if I'd be like, here you go, because some of our kids, even folding for some of our kids, it's still like they see that big old wad and it's overwhelming. But if they can just see like, half of a paper or a fourth. But yeah, you can definitely um do something like that, brain breaks, first then boards. Even letting her pick where do you want to stand up to do this? Do you want to sit on the floor? Those are some things that you can do. Do you want to use a crayon? Do you want to use a pencil? Do you want to use a marker? Some of our kids too, if you have like an iPad, you can take a picture of it and let them do it on the iPad. So like that's, like use a pencil. We've done that before. Even putting it on like Maria's box light, and letting them, and then you just take a picture of it and submit it to the teacher if you can't save it or whatever. So there's just different things that you can do that to make it for our kiddos. Obviously, you don't want them, because life's not going to always be like that, right? So you want to work, wean them off of it. But to get them started, I definitely think of, like, hey, we might do one page on the iPad, but I need you to do one page with paper, pencil, or crayon paper or whatever. So yeah, you could do something like that. But you talked about the problem solving, and I kind of want to touch on that, like you just briefly hit on that. Problem solving is one of the hardest things that special ed teachers have when it comes to being evaluated. Because it looks so different in a gen ed setting versus a special ed setting. And so like I always got marked down on problem solving and thinking and questioning. And it's how you, and I tell our teachers this too, it's how you turn it in on your lesson plan or on your post conference with your special ed or with your principal. So like with problem solving, giving kids the choice between tools, like, hey, do you want to do it on the iPad? Do you want to use crayon? That right there is problem solving. They're like learning and to self-advocate for themselves, what works best for them. Working, like if they're like this little first grader, because I think I know who you're talking about. She's sweet as can be, right? But she has to work through, I don't want to say behavioral challenges, but more of like that distractibility, right? Like, so she has to work through those challenges. Well, for her, that's a problem solving skill. Like, hey, I need to attend, Miss Grace has set my timer for 2 minutes. I can't be distracted. How am I going to get through that 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever? Those are problem solving things that you're incorporating. So you need to take credit for that. If you're fading the prompts and she's doing well at your fading prompts, or any of your kids, that's also problem solving. So you give yourself credit for those things, especially when you're being observed, because those are problem solving. Those are not necessarily problem solving that you would see in a gen ed class, but for your kids, that's very appropriate. So always count yourself. And like I said, it's always in how you verbalize that back to your observer. So give yourself credit for those things. So that's just my little tip and trick. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I definitely appreciate that, because I haven't been observed or really like thought about me being observed and how like that would look gen ed versus special ed.
Mhm.
So I definitely appreciate that, and
Yeah.
that it is going to look different. And so,
And like whatever you're doing with them, so like that, like, whatever you're doing, regardless if it's 1 student or 10 students, the like to be at expectation is what you're doing with them meaningful. And it should be, right? Otherwise we're not doing it. And then if they do make an error, and that was some of the things that we've talked about today, if they do make an error, allowing it to be a learning process, and that also is part of the problem solving process as well. So yep.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Stop that.